While the world watches the headlines coming out of the Middle East, something quiet and lethal is happening to your bank account. Right now, as the conflict in Iran escalates and the Strait of Hormuz effectively closes, the $39 trillion US national debt has entered a death spiral. Your savings aren't just sitting there. They are being liquidated by a war economy you didn't vote for. In this video, I'm showing you the 3 black swan events happening this week that will change the value of the dollar forever, and the one asset the 1% are buying while you're distracted by the news. We are currently witnessing a massive geopolitical shift that most people are completely unprepared for. When global conflict flares up, the first casualty is always the purchasing power of the average citizen. You might think that a war across the ocean doesn't affect your morning coffee or your rent, but the financial plumbing of the world is interconnected in ways that are now being stressed to the point of failure. The national debt isn't just a number on a screen anymore. It is a weight that is pulling down the value of every single dollar you have worked to save. Every time a new aid package is signed or a new military operation is launched, the Treasury must issue more debt, which the Federal Reserve eventually has to monetize. This is the invisible thief. You don't see him taking money out of your wallet, but you see the prices at the grocery store and the gas station climbing higher and higher. The reality of 2026 is that we are no longer in a period of stability. We are in a period of radical transformation. If you continue to follow the old rules of finance, keeping all your money in a standard savings account and hoping for a 2% return, you are effectively choosing to get poorer every single day. Today, we are breaking down the hard truths that the mainstream media refuses to discuss, because they are too busy chasing clicks on sensationalist headlines. We are going to look at the math, the macroeconomics, and the real-world implications of this conflict on your personal wealth. This is your wake-up call. The Strait of Hormuz is the world's most important oil artery, and right now, it's a no-go zone. Over 20% of the world's oil supply is currently trapped. But here is what the news isn't telling you. This isn't just about gas prices hitting $6 a gallon. This is about fertilizer. The Persian Gulf exports 30% of the world's urea and ammonia. When the strait closes, the cost of food production doesn't just go up, it doubles. We are looking at a scenario where your grocery bill is about to become a second mortgage. If you think inflation was bad in 2024, you aren't ready for the supply shock of 2026. To understand the gravity of this situation, you have to look past the fuel pump. Modern agriculture is essentially the process of turning fossil fuels and minerals into calories. Without the nitrogen-based fertilizers that flow through that narrow waterway, global crop yields will plummet. This isn't a theory. It is basic chemistry and logistics. Farmers in the Midwest are already seeing their input costs skyrocket, which means by the time that corn or wheat reaches your table, the price has been compounded by every step of the supply chain. We are talking about a systemic shock that affects everything from the bread you buy to the meat produced by livestock that eats that grain. This is why the term energy security is now synonymous with survival. When the energy flow is restricted, the cost of moving goods increases, the cost of manufacturing increases, and the cost of simply staying warm or cool in your own home becomes a luxury. Most people focus on the immediate spike in gas prices because it is the most visible, but the real danger lies in the lagged inflation that will hit the economy 6 months from now. The industrial sector cannot function without predictable energy costs. When that predictability vanishes, companies pass those costs directly to you, the consumer. We are entering a phase where the globalized supply chain, which relied on cheap energy and open seas, is being dismantled in real time. You must realize that the era of cheap abundance is being replaced by an era of strategic scarcity. This week, the United States officially crossed the $39 trillion debt mark. To put that in perspective, we are now spending more on interest payments than we are on our entire defense budget. But here's the kicker: war is expensive. Every missile fired and every carrier strike group deployed adds billions to a tab that we can't pay back. When a government has too much debt and enters a conflict, they only have one tool left: the printing press. Every new dollar printed to fund this conflict makes the ones in your savings account worth 5% less. You are effectively paying for this war through the devaluation of your hard-earned money. The math of the US deficit is now in a territory that economists call unfunded liabilities. We are no longer just borrowing to build infrastructure or fund social programs. We are borrowing just to pay the interest on the money we already borrowed. This is a classic debt trap. When you add a major regional conflict into this mix, the spending becomes uncontrollable. Defense contractors and military logistics require immediate funding, and in a high interest rate environment, that money is incredibly expensive to obtain. The government cannot simply raise taxes enough to cover these costs without crashing the economy entirely. Therefore, they turn to inflationary finance. This is the process where the central bank buys government bonds with newly created money, effectively diluting the total pool of currency. It is a hidden tax that hits the poor and the middle class the hardest. While the wealthy own assets like real estate and stocks that often rise in nominal value during inflation, the person working for a fixed salary sees their lifestyle erode month after month. Your $100 bill today might only buy $85 worth of goods by next year if this pace continues. This is the reality of a wartime economy in a debt-soaked nation. We are reaching a tipping point where the rest of the world is questioning the long-term viability of the dollar as the primary reserve currency. If the world stops wanting to hold our debt, the interest rates will have to go even higher, which accelerates the collapse. You need to stop viewing the national debt as a political talking point and start viewing it as a direct threat to your family's future. For 40 years, the safe bet was US Treasuries. But in April 2026, the rules have changed. Institutional investors are starting to look at the US deficit, which is now 7% of our total GDP, and they are getting nervous. When the world's reserve currency starts to look shaky because of geopolitical overreach, capital flees. We are seeing a massive flight to quality, but it's not going into banks, it's going into hard assets. If your portfolio is still 100% in paper assets and traditional bonds, you are holding a bag of melting ice cubes in a heat wave. The traditional 60-40 portfolio, 60% stocks and 40% bonds, was designed for an era of falling interest rates and global peace. That era is officially over. Bonds are supposed to be the ballast of your ship, providing stability when stocks are volatile. However, in a world of high inflation and massive government deficits, bonds actually become one of the riskiest assets you can hold. If inflation is running at 8% and your bond is paying you 5%, you are losing 3% of your wealth every year with guaranteed certainty. This is why we are seeing a historic shift in how the smartest money on Wall Street is being positioned. They are looking for intrinsic value, things that cannot be printed or willed into existence by a central bank. We are talking about gold, silver, productive land, and essential commodities. The psychological shift is just as important as the financial one. People are losing faith in the full faith and credit of the government. When you see the sovereign debt of the world's largest economy being downgraded or traded with high volatility, it signals that the foundation of the global financial system is cracking. You cannot afford to be the last person to realize that the safe haven has moved. The game has changed from return on capital to return of capital. Protecting what you have is now more important than chasing speculative gains in an overvalued stock market. You need to audit your holdings and ask yourself, if the dollar lost another 20% of its value tomorrow, what would I own that would still be worth something? If the answer is nothing, then you are in a very dangerous position. Let's talk about the silent killer, fertilizer. Because the Middle East is a hub for nitrogen and phosphate, the current blockade is causing a global shortage. Why does this matter to your money? Because companies like Tyson Foods, PepsiCo, and every major grocery chain are about to see their margins vanish. If you are invested in standard consumer staples, you need to look at their supply chain exposure immediately. The reality of 2026 is that energy security and food security are now the same thing. Investors who understand this are moving into Western-based commodity producers who are insulated from the Persian Gulf chaos. This is a deep dive into the microeconomics of the conflict. Most investors think they are safe because they own defensive stocks like food and beverage companies. They assume people always have to eat. While that is true, the profitability of these companies depends entirely on the cost of raw materials. When the price of natural gas, which is the primary input for nitrogen fertilizer, spikes, the entire cost structure of global food production shifts upward. This creates a massive margin squeeze. These companies can try to raise prices, but there is a limit to what the consumer can pay before demand starts to drop. This is how a geopolitical conflict in the Middle East turns into a stock market crash in New York. We are seeing a divergence between companies that consume energy and commodities and those that produce them. In the old economy, being a consumer was fine because resources were cheap. In the new wartime economy, the producers hold all the cards. You want to be invested in the companies that own the mines, the wells, and the processing plants located in stable, domestic regions. We are seeing a renationalization of supply chains. The companies that relied on just-in-time delivery from halfway around the world are now scrambling to find local alternatives, often at a much higher price. This shift is inflationary by nature. It means the efficiency dividend we enjoyed for the last 30 years is being replaced by a security premium. You are paying more for the same products simply because it is now more expensive to guarantee they will actually show up on the shelf. As an investor, you must follow the trail of the raw materials. If you don't own the beginning of the supply chain, you are at the mercy of whoever does. The Federal Reserve is currently trapped in a corner. If they lower interest rates to help the economy survive the wartime slump, inflation will skyrocket to 10% or higher because of the energy crisis. If they keep rates high to save the dollar, they risk a total collapse of the housing market and a massive recession. Right now, they are choosing the middle path, stagflation. This is the worst-case scenario for the average person. Prices go up, but your salary stays the same and the economy doesn't grow. In this reality, the only way to win is to stop thinking like a consumer and start thinking like a central bank. Stagflation is a term that many younger investors have only read about in history books, but it was the defining characteristic of the 1970s. It is a period where the traditional tools of the central bank stop working. Usually, when the economy slows down, inflation drops. But when you have a supply-side shock like a war-induced energy shortage, prices keep rising even as people lose their jobs and businesses close. This creates a miserable environment for building wealth. The value of your home might stay the same in dollar terms, but in terms of what that house can buy you in gold or oil, the value is crashing. The Fed knows that if they raise rates too high, the interest on the $39 trillion national debt becomes unpayable, leading to a sovereign default. But if they print more money to pay that interest, they destroy the dollar. They are essentially trying to manage a controlled demolition of the currency's purchasing power to prevent a sudden explosion of the financial system. For you, this means that passive investing in an index fund might not be enough to keep your head above water. You have to be more tactical. You have to look for sectors that have pricing power, companies that can raise their prices faster than inflation without losing customers. This usually includes utilities, healthcare, and specialized technology. Most importantly, you need to minimize your exposure to high-interest debt. In a stagflationary environment, the cost of servicing debt can quickly overwhelm your income. We are moving into a cash flow world. If an investment doesn't put actual money in your pocket every month to cover your rising costs, it is a liability, not an asset. Part 7. So, where is the smart money going? I've analyzed the moves of the top 1% this month, and the trend is clear. They are exiting growth tech and luxury retail and piling into defense tech, domestic energy, and cybersecurity, with the conflict moving into the digital realm. Companies that protect our power grids and financial systems are the new blue chips. This isn't about being a war profiteer. It's about recognizing that the global economy has shifted from a peace dividend to a security premium. You must adapt your holdings to reflect the world as it is, not as you wish it were. The concept of the peace dividend was the idea that because the world was relatively stable, we could spend less on defense and more on consumer innovation and social services. That trend is now reversing. Governments around the world are drastically increasing their military budgets. This money flows directly into the balance sheets of aerospace and defense companies. Furthermore, the war in 2026 isn't just being fought with tanks and ships. It's being fought with code. Cybersecurity has become the most critical infrastructure of the modern age. When a nation is at war, its banking systems, power plants, and communication networks are all targets. The companies that provide the shields for these systems are seeing unprecedented demand. At the same time, we are seeing a massive move toward energy independence. Any company that helps a country produce its own power without relying on the Middle East or other volatile regions is being revalued at a much higher multiple. This includes nuclear energy, domestic natural gas, and the infrastructure needed to transport these resources. The smart money is also moving into alternative assets that are uncorrelated with the stock market. This includes private credit, high-end collectibles, and even carbon credits. The goal is diversification in its truest sense, owning things that don't all go down at the same time when a headline hits the news. We are seeing the death of the globalized consumer model and the birth of the localized fortress model. Investors are looking for stability and safety above all else. If you are still chasing the next hot AI startup that has no revenue and burns cash, you are playing a game from a different era. Today, The winners are the companies that provide the essential building blocks of a secure society. Part 8. In a world where the dollar is being used as a weapon of war and the national debt is unsustainable, decentralized wealth is no longer a luxury, it's insurance. We are seeing gold hit record highs of nearly $3,000 an ounce, and Bitcoin is acting as the digital escape hatch for global capital. When the Strait of Hormuz closes, people realize that physical supply chains are fragile. Digital and hard assets that don't depend on a government's ability to pay its debt are the ultimate hedge. You don't need to be a prepper, but you do need a portion of your net worth outside the traditional banking system. This is the final piece of the puzzle for 2026. The concept of sovereign risk is something Americans haven't had to think about for a long time, but it is now front and center. When you have your money in a bank, you are technically a creditor to that bank. If the banking system faces a liquidity crisis due to the debt bubble bursting, your access to that cash could be restricted. This is why having outside money that is nobody else's liability is so important. Gold has served this role for 5,000 years because it has no counterparty risk. Bitcoin is a 21st century version of that same idea, offering portability and transparency in a world of financial censorship and currency devaluations. We are seeing a double hedge strategy being used by high net worth individuals: physical gold for long-term stability and digital assets for liquidity and growth. The next 30 days are critical because the geopolitical situation is moving faster than the markets can price it in. You need to audit your exposure to import-dependent companies and maximize your cash flow assets. Inflation eats debt, which is good if you have a low-interest fixed mortgage, but it also eats stagnant cash. You must stay informed and remain agile. The situation in the Middle East is fluid, and one headline could send oil to $150 overnight, causing a total reset of market expectations. I've prepared a conflict survival guide for your finances, detailing the specific sectors I'm buying right now to protect my family's future. The world is changing fast, don't let it leave you behind. This isn't about fear, it's about preparation. The people who thrive in the next decade will be the ones who saw the signs early and had the courage to move their capital before the crowd. Subscribe for the next update so you don't miss the latest data as it breaks. Stay safe and stay smart.